kick it off. Jonathan Carl.
Sean, day before yesterday, you said you were extremely confident that the House and Senate Intelligence Committees would ultimately vindicate the president's allegation that Trump Tower was wiretapped. As I'm sure you have now seen, the Senate Intelligence Committee has said they see no indications Trump Tower was the subject of surveillance. That seems to be a pretty blanket statement. What's your reaction?
Well, I think there's several things. I would also, it's interesting to me that, just as a point of interest, that when one entity says one thing that claims one thing, you guys cover it ad nauseum. When Devin Nunes came out and said, I think it's very possible, yesterday, there was crickets from you guys. When Devin Nunes came out and said there was no connection that he saw to Russia, crickets. When Tom Cotton said the same, you don't want to cover the stuff. No, hold on.
No evidence of wiretapping at Trump Tower. So now you've had the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Actually, here's his quote, Jonathan. Here's the direct quote. I think it's very possible, end quote. That's what he said when he said the president's communications could have been swept up in collection. So again,
I saw no indication of wiretapping.
I understand that,
no evidence of wiretapping.
And I think the president's been very clear when he talked about this, and he talked about it last night. When we talked about wiretapping, he meant surveillance, and that there have been incidents that have occurred. Devin Nunes couldn't have stated it more beautifully. But you choose not to cover that part. You chose not to cover when Tom Cotton went out, when Richard Burr went out, when others, Chairman Nunes and others, and said that there was no. Hold on. I understand that, Jonathan. And where was your passion and where was your concern when they all said that there was no connection to Russia? Where was it then? You crickets from you guys, because at the end of the day, when hold on. I'm making a point. The point is this: number one, that it's interesting how when evidence comes out and people who have been briefed on the Russia connection come out and say that there was nothing that they have seen that proves a connection, you choose not to cover that. You don't stop the narrative. You continue to perpetuate a false narrative. When he came out yesterday and said, "quote, I see no evidence that this happened," when he said, "quote, I think it's very possible, but like I said, we should know later," you don't cover that part. You only cover the part that this is. But let's go through what we do know, okay? Hold on. I'm trying to answer your question, Jonathan, if you can calm down. If you look at what the New York Times reported on January 2017, they said, quote, in its final days, the Obama administration has expanded the power of the National Security Agency to share globally intercepted personal communications with the government's 16 other intelligence agencies before applying privacy protections. The new rules significantly relax long-standing limits on what the NSA may do with the information gathered by its most powerful surveillance operation, which are largely unregulated by wiretapping laws. When Sarah Carter reported that by the start of the new year brought with it unexpected politicizing of the intelligence gathered in secret. Separately, the Obama administration amended a long-standing executive order allowing information intercepted through FISA warrants or by the National Security Agency to be shared by a wider audience in 16 government agencies as Obama was leaving offices. Intelligence normally reserved for just a handful of intelligence leaders was spread throughout briefings to scores of workers, and soon leaks began appearing in news media organizations, often in stories lacking context of how national security investigations are actually concluded. On March 3rd, Fox News chief anchor Bret Baier said the following, quote, there's a report in June 2016, a FISA request by the Obama administration forwarded intelligence surveillance court to monitor communications involving Donald Trump and several other campaign officials. Then they got turned down, then in October. Then they renewed it and do a startup wiretap at Trump Tower with some computer and Russian banks. Baier continues. A June FISA request that foreign intelligence surveillance courts get shot down. A judge says, Jonathan, you can ask, you can follow up. A judge says no go to monitoring Trump Tower. They go back in October. They do get a FISA granted. This is wiretap going on in a monitoring of computers that is sometimes they believe to Russian counts. By all accounts, they don't come up with anything in the investigation, but the investigation continues and we don't know it. On November 11th, 2016, days after the election, Heat Street reported, quote, two separate sources with links to the counterintelligence community had confirmed to Heat Street that the FBI sought and was granted a FISA warrant in October, giving counter-surveillance intelligence permission to examine the activities of U.S. persons in Donald Trump's campaign with ties to Russia. The first request, which sources say named Trump, was denied back in June, but the second was drawn more narrowly and granted in October after evidence was presented of a server, possibly related to the Trump campaign and its alleged alleged links to two banks, SVB Bank and Russia's Alpha Bank. Sources suggest that a FISA warrant was granted to look at the full context of related documents that concern U.S. person. Two separate sources with links to the counterintelligence community have confirmed that the FBI sought and was granted a FISA warrant in October, giving counterintelligence permission to examine the activity of U.S. persons in Donald Trump's campaign with ties to Russia. They go on. The FISA warrant was granted in connection with the investigation of suspected activities between the server and two banks. However, it is thought that the intelligence community that the warrant covers any U.S. person connected to this UN investigation, and thus covers Donald Trump and at least three further men who have either formed part of his campaign or acted as media surrogates. On January 19th, the New York Times reported the following. American law enforcement and intelligence agencies are examining intercepted communication and financial transactions as part of a broad investigation of possible leaks between Russian officials and associates of President-elect Donald J. Trump. One official said intelligence reports based on some of the wiretapped communications have been provided to the White House. It is unclear which Russian officials under investigation or what particular conversations caught the attention of American eavesdroppers. The legal standard for opening these investigations is low. Andy McCarthy, writing in National Review, suggested, quote, from three reports from The Guardian, Heat Street, and the New York Times, it appears the FBI has concerns about a private server in Trump Tower that was connected to one or two Russian banks. Heat Street describes these concerns as centering on, quote, possible financial and banking offenses. This is his quote. I italicized the word offenses because it denotes crimes. Ordinarily, when crimes are suspected, there is a criminal investigation, not a national security investigation. We go on. Sarah Carter from Circa reporting, intelligence professionals tell Circa News they were concerned that some of the Russian intelligence was spread through group briefings to a much larger than usual audience back in January. This would have happened during the final days of the Obama administration when it expanded Executive Order 12333, which allows employees with a, quote, need to know have further unfettered access to raw data stored by the NSA. The new rules allowed the NSA to share, quote, raw signals intelligence information, including the names of those involved in phone conversations and emails. The expansion of the order makes it difficult to narrow in on the leaks, and frankly, it allows too many people access to the raw data, which only used to be available to a select few, said a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity and was not granted to speak on the authority. Numerous outlets, including the New York Times, have reported on the FBI investigation into Mr. Trump's advisors. BBC and then McClatchy revealed the existence of a multi-agency working group to coordinate investigations across the thing. On February 14th, the New York Times again refers to phone records and intercepted calls. Let me quote them. American Law Enforcement and Intelligence Agency intercepted the communications around the same time they were discovering the evidence that Russia was trying to disrupt the presidential election by hacking into the Democratic National Committee, three officials said. The intelligence agencies then thought to learn whether the Trump campaign was colluding with the Russians on hacking or other efforts to influence the election. The officials interviewed in recent weeks said that so far they have seen no evidence of such cooperation. The officials said that the intercepted communications were not limited to Trump campaign officials and other associates of Mr. Trump. The call logs and intercepted communications are part of a larger trove of information that the FBI is sifting through. Days later, the New York Times then reports, quote, in the Obama administration's last days, some White House officials scrambled to spread information about Russian efforts to undermine the presidential election of Donald Trump, connections between the president-elect and Russians across the government. But the increasingly hard-to-escape conclusion that individuals in our government were instead trying to undermine the new president by saying, quote, and this is the New York Times again, at intelligence agencies there was a push to process as much raw intelligence into possible analysis to keep the report at relatively low classification levels to ensure a widespread readership across the government, and in some cases, quote, among them European allies. This allowed the upload of as much intelligence as possible to Intellipedia, a secret wiki used by American analysis to share information. Sean Hannity went on Fox to say, quote, but protections which are known as minimization procedures have been put in place to protect Americans that are not under warrant, American citizens that are caught up in their surveillance. And, quote, by the way, their identities are protected. Their constitutional rights are protected. Now, of course, this was not the case with Lieutenant General Flynn because a transcript of his call was created and then given to intelligence officials who then leaked this information, which is a felony, to the press that printed it, end quote. Last, on Fox News on March 14th, Judge Andrew Napolitano made the following statement, quote, 3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News that President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA, he didn't use the CIA, he didn't use the FBI, and he didn't use the Department of Justice. He used GCHQ. What is that? It's the initials for the British Intelligence Spying Agency. So simply by having two people saying to them, President needs transcripts of conversations involving candidate Trump's conversations involving President-elect Trump, he's able to get it, and there's no American fingerprints on this. Putting the published counts and common sense together, this leads to a lot.
So, Sean, are you
So,
saying
John.